With a diverse wildlife population and a unique history and geography, the Svalbard Islands certainly has its story to tell. Hi, I'm Matt, and welcome to another edition of Borders on Budgets. On this episode, we will visit the Svalbard Museum and the North Pole Expedition Museum in Longyearbyen, the Svalbard Islands, Norway.
Hi, I'm Matt, and welcome to this pack of matches, and thank you very much for tuning in.
Seems like this should be on the Blair Witch.
Next episode. A reminder, Borders on Budgets.
The museum shares the same building as the village of Longyearbyen's campus of the University of Norway's Polar Institutes. Greeting visitors to the museum is this walrus, one of many marine animals on display. Svalbard's geography is its history, and the land centuries ago was known for its rich hunting opportunities. By the early 17th century, the Svalbard archipelago became known as a treasure trove of whaling and oil extraction from these large mammals. I'm a non-meat eater, but the museum, they've made these pieces of styrofoam looking like whale blubber awfully inviting for lunch. It was in the late 19th century when Svalbard experienced a rush of human settlement when it was discovered that on this archipelago there was riches to be had in mining for coal. Located between the 74th and the 81st degrees north, the Svalbard archipelago encompasses about 60,000 square kilometers. It wasn't until 1920, when numerous countries were otherwise staking their claim to this land for its minerals, that the Svalbards were actually awarded to one country, Norway. The unusual stipulations of the 1920 treaty means that Norway cannot collect revenues from the Svalbards and transfer them back to the mainland. Also, Norway, while it owns and operates the Svalbards, cannot have a military presence here, and anybody can come and work and reside on the Svalbards without any sort of discrimination towards nationality status. For decades, life on the Svalbards for hunters and coal miners, to put it bluntly, would have been a barren and isolating experience. While this rifle is a century old, it isn't too dissimilar from that which is used by present-day guides and those working outside of Longyearbyen regarding the protection against polar bears. Because of the barren and treeless landscape of the Svalbards, the geology of the area can easily be seen and likely meant that coal mining was made easier. This depiction of a coal miner's job is descriptively dirty and eerily dangerous. Just the weight of this battery pack to fuel the coal miner's headlamp weighs several kilograms and quite awkward to carry around, and yes, real coal on display. The Svalbards are transitioning their economy from what had been coal mining to now present-day tourism and environmental studies. Because of Svalbard's isolation and dry climate, the vault contains seeds of more than 5,000 species of plants and has the capacity to hold over 2 billion seeds. As we transition from the Svalbard Museum to the next destination, here's a quick glimpse of the housing at Longyearbyen. And that metal structure on the mountain, that is an avalanche barrier. From the Svalbard Museum and the university, it's only steps across the street to the North Pole Expedition Museum. Yes, even in Longyearbyen, look both ways for traffic. I would also say look for polar bears, but they're not as much of a danger in town as scooter traffic. Unlike the walrus at the Svalbard Museum, at the North Pole Expedition Museum, greeting visitors is a century-old lifeboat. For a craft that was on a 1909 expedition, or potential expedition, to the North Pole, this is in awfully good condition. It almost feels like I'm trying to sell this boat. However, we're going to ignore the holes in the hull. While much has been made of the storied race between Robert Peary and Roald Amundsen to get to the South Pole in the early 20th century, not as much is known about the first expeditions to the North Pole. Personally, up until I entered this museum, I had no idea that one of the first attempts to reach the North Pole at the turn of the 20th century was via this airship. This airship was owned by American journalist Walter Wellman and would have been one of the first aviation expeditions. While Wellman's airship, the America, did not reach the North Pole in 1909 because he had heard that Robert Peary had reached the North Pole, by then he did not continue his northern expeditions. Robert Peary and fellow American explorer Frederick Cook both claimed to have reached the North Pole. However, years later, their claims were universally, scientifically rejected. The importance of the Svalbard Islands, especially in early 20th century exploration, is that this archipelago is only about 1,100 kilometers from the North Pole. And for early explorers, this area would have served as a base towards the race for the North Pole. It wasn't until 1926, when the North Pole had been crossed by Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen and Italian explorer Umberto Nobile in the airship Norge. 2 years later, an airship named Italia, financed by the Italian government, also attempted its own crossing of the North Pole. However, it was ill-fated, crashed, and could not reach its final destination, and it crashed in the Svalbard Islands. What made that rescue attempt noteworthy is that then, and 90 years later, still the largest Arctic search and rescue mission to date. Leading that search and rescue was this Russian boat named the Krasin. In the attempt to rescue those 8 Italian explorers, more than 1,500 men and the coordination of 7 nations were required, and that was 90 years ago in what has been to date the largest Arctic search and rescue operation. Imagine what should happen if in today, as cruising and shipping in the Arctic Ocean and waters has increased, if perhaps hundreds or thousands needed to be rescued. This has been another edition of Borders on Budgets. A reminder, Borders on Budgets, long distance hikes, slices of life, not a lot of money. From the Svalbard Museum and the North Pole Expedition Museum in Longyearbyen in the Svalbard Islands in Norway, thank you very much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
Ooh, tunnel! It's a tunnel! Oh, how neat! Woo, woo!
Ça va?
And here we have the foreman checking out his crew. Did you like this video? Good. Help Borders on Budgets grow. Hit the subscribe button below, and don't forget to share this video with your friends who like Arctic or wilderness travel.